Hi, my name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of How Did That Happen? This week we are discussing popes and the Vatican, and there is a lot to learn. So come along for the ride this week as I ask, popes and the Vatican, how did that happen? All right, thanks for coming back for another episode of How Did That Happen? This week is episode 30. Really happy to have gotten to this point. Wasn't sure, throughout some of the times if we would ever get this far, but it's really cool to see how we can just keep finding out how things happen. I appreciate all you guys that come along for the ride every week. I've been talking to some of you guys, and it's really great. I'd love to hear, more things you have to say. I mean, and along those same lines, share this with somebody who likes history and just odd facts, because that's really kind of all this is. And let's help grow this. And if you want to subscribe, that's great. I would love that if you could leave a comment and just let people know that you love how things happen just as much as I do. That'd be great. But if you don't, man, if you want to keep coming back and just listening, that's fine too, because I know how it is. I don't subscribe to every podcast that I listen to, so I'm not going to sit here and be like, yeah, any of that stuff. But yeah, so this is episode 30. I'm glad everybody presses play every week. We recently hit a couple milestones, or at least one or two. We finally got over 1,000 followers on the Twitter account. Yeah, when we hit a high for our weekly downloads. We got over 70 downloads last week, which is just crazy. And we got like 72. And it might seem small to some people, but the fact that there's 70 people out there who downloaded an episode, or 50 people, and some of y'all downloaded it twice. I don't know, but the fact that happens, it means a lot to me. So yeah, not before I get too savvy, we'll just go ahead and hop into this episode. This one is about popes, like the history of the papacy, if you will, and also the Vatican. I throw a little bit in there, and there's also kind of a little special treat, if you will. There's a bonus topic at the end that I just do in there because, like I said, I'm trying something new. This is episode 30, so that's kind of why what I like about this podcast is I just keep kind of just throwing things in and taking things out when they don't fit, kind of like a puzzle piece, But yeah, so look forward to the end bonus topic. I'm not going to say what it is. You'll find out towards the end. You can skip past the papacy and the Vatican and find out what it is. But yeah, thank you guys for hanging in for 30 episodes. Hope we got 30 more in us. So St. Peter is considered to be the first pope, but we'll get into where that really falls into like the timeline and history here in a second. But he was one of the 12 or 11 original apostles, depending on what time you're looking at. And he walked with Jesus. And so the name Pope wouldn't actually be used for centuries. But since he was the only apostle to actually oversee a church, and being that church was in Rome, that kind of makes him the first pope in history. St. Peter died somewhere between 64 AD 64 and 68 AD, depending on who you ask. He was crucified upside down because when he was about to be crucified the regular way, like as Jesus was, he said he wasn't worthy of being crucified the same way as Jesus, which is just his presence of mind during getting ready to be killed. I'm a little bit in awe of that. I would just be like, you're going to kill me. You're going to kill me. I wouldn't be like, kill me this way, because I'm not worthy. And I'm not trying to make light of it, because that's respect, but I just mean like that would probably never cross my mind. I would just be like, yeah, I guess it's over. But yeah, after St. Peter's death, the next step towards the creation of popes comes in the form of the Bishop of Rome, which is still kind of the Pope's official or unofficial title, if you will. If you go on, the Wikipedia right now, one of the titles of the Pope is the Bishop of Rome. And so this position originates because basically all the Christian towns at that time had bishops. And St. Linus, he assumed the position of Bishop of Rome right after St. Peter. And for years, he I guess particularly through the 2nd and 3rd century, he was considered the first pope. Things change and people think different things as time goes on. But so for a while, he was considered I guess the first one, because I don't know. I'm not sure why, I guess really, but I guess because he had actually created. I'm not really sure why when you really think about it. I don't know. Getting back to the bishops, they were considered the most Christian men in the city. The man closest to God, basically, in that region. And being that Rome was the home of early Christianity due to St. Peter, the Bishop of Rome became the highest level. And it was actually said during some things that I watched that there was At some point, because the three biggest cities in Rome, in the Western Roman Empire during the time, were Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. And there was said that, I guess during the early times, before they had really kind of hammered this out, that there was a Pope of Alexandria. So like, kind of saying like it wasn't always, I guess, a foregone conclusion that the Bishop of Rome would be the Pope. It kind of just ended up going that way. Let's see, in 312 A.D., Emperor Constantine, who was not the emperor yet, excuse me, let's not jump the gun. Constantine, he was the pagan commander of Rome's Western army, and he declared war on the eastern side to see who would actually, who could be the true emperor. And during this time, Constantine, he finds Jesus and becomes a Christian. So he is considered the first Christian emperor of Rome. And one of his first official acts is to issue what's called the Edict of Milan. And this basically makes Christianity legal. It asks that everyone treat Christians with benevolence rather than persecution, which is important because at that time, Christians were getting killed left and right just for believing in God. That's why they got old St. Peter. And it's really wild. When I watched this documentary, honestly, I didn't watch the entire thing because it's all inclusive. But it's basically about the history of Christianity from the moment Jesus dies up until today. And I watched like the first 400 years of it because I just figured that's all I really needed for this right now. And it's just to see the amount of people that just get murdered. You know what I mean? Like just boiling people in oil and hanging and crucifying people, all just because they believe something different than you, regardless of what you think it is. I mean, I don't know. It's just wild. But yeah, back to the Edict of Milan. It helped make Christianity favorable among the people. However, it did not establish Christianity as the state religion of Rome. It's a pretty big distinction. I think some people think it does. It really was just like, can you stop killing them, please, and just be nice to them? But Emperor Constantine at this point, gives power in the towns to the bishops, and they end up, kind of having this real place of power in society, and then they settle disputes, and they control the food supply. At this time, he also makes churches tax exempt, which is the reason they're still tax exempt to this day. So it's crazy to think that 2,000 years ago, a rule that was made is still held, and that's if you're ever wondering why that is, it's really not. It's not America that's doing that. It's the fact that we are all, no matter how far we try to get away from it, are still just kind of living in this like next like iteration of the Western Roman Empire. If you really look at, if you've listened to this podcast before, it's kind of the soapbox that I stand on, but there's just so many different aspects of life relate directly back to how they did it 2,000 years ago, simply just because of that. And you think it's because that people thought of it for a long time and thought, oh, this is the best way to do it. It's more just like, oh, people thought of it once and we're like, this is the way we're going to do it. There was infighting in the church. So Constantine called a conference to find a way to come together, and they created the Nicaea Creed, which first occurs at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. And this basically lays out what it means to be a Christian. Things like Jesus Christ being divine and on the same level of God, which if you look at, which I really didn't know that much about it, but there was a time, and still now a little bit, where people argue about the idea of like the Trinity and stuff like that, and whether Jesus was always a part of God or became a part of God throughout time. But pretty much everybody, as you'll find out if you do the research, pretty much believes in the Trinity and the fact that that Jesus was always a part of God. But that's a whole different thing. And this is not a religion podcast. This is just really, you have to delve into this stuff in order to really understand how and why these positions came to be and how they have so much reverence in the community. Let's see. So yeah, all the bishops had to sign it or risk being excommunicated from the church. So, but then in 476 AD, a man by the name of Odoacer, who was considered a barbarian at the time, came with his group of soldiers and overthrew child emperor Romulus Augustus, and he named himself the King of Italy when he did so. This is marked as the end of the Western Roman Empire, basically in all the history books, and when you can really say like this is definitively when it went down. But it's interesting to note that King Odoacer at that point, worked with the Eastern Roman Empire when he was doing all this, and he was said to even have the Roman Senate on his side. But the head of the church moves to Constantinople, and the church begins to thrive there. Since the church is centered in Constantinople at the time, a lot of the languages used for religious purposes were changed from Latin to Greek. And this has always interested me not that, well, really just the fact that if you look back in history, there's so many different religious texts that are like sacred, but they're both in the two different languages. And I don't know, I just always wondered why they couldn't have ever agreed on like one language to bring it all through. But this really explains it. It's just history. Like, the Western Roman Empire fell apart, and so they had to go over to the Eastern Roman Empire, which is, mainly they spoke in Greek. So that's just a little interesting tidbit. So this does actually get to, I guess, the nitty gritty of it, if you will, when we talk about how the church shifts from the Western Roman Empire to the Eastern Roman Empire, because that is actually what gives us this word Pope. So around 600 AD, they begin to call the Bishop of Rome Father, which in Greek translates to Papas or Pope. So basically, it is because of the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the shift of the church from the western part to the eastern part that we actually get the name of the Pope, who, as we know, as time goes on, comes back to the western part and that's where he kind of rules out of, if you will. Just interesting, because that's what this podcast is about, is how did that happen? And that's why it was so interesting to go back and see all the history of basically the early part of Christianity, because you have to understand the early part of Christianity to even understand why they would even care in the first place. So if you're wondering why we were kind of in the sticks back there with all this religious history, I know, like I said, it's not a religious podcast. It's just a podcast about this specific episode is a podcast about religion, because the Pope is religious. But it really is interesting to see how just the shift of where they were based out of has basically affected the nomenclature for the last 1,500 years. I don't know. Just so yeah. But so since Rome was in such a bad way during this time, the Christian people really had to look to the Bishop of Rome, or the Pope, to give them their food and water and help them survive in what was a bad time, because this was a time when Christians in that space really had to band together like they had to the old times, because the area was run by pagan barbarians, basically, King Odoacer and his predecessors, his successors. And so it really was a time where people look to the Pope, because I've always wondered what really, besides the fact that they say he's, touched by God and all this stuff like that, and he's the highest, person in that religion. It's like, what really made it, what really laid the foundation? And this seems to be one of those times when they were the only refuge they had. The Roman people was to come to the Pope, who, like we've said earlier, was in control of the food supply, the water supply, and everything like that. So it does kind of explain why people have so much respect for that position. Seems to go back for a while, but this also marks the beginning of the Greek Orthodox Church. This split happens when Pope Leo III crowns King Charlemagne of France as the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Eastern Church doesn't really like that very much. But we're getting a little off the timeline here. But the role of the Pope was said to really have been solidified, depending on who you ask, when Pope Urban II created the Crusaders and took back Jerusalem from the Muslims. And this is important because, it's your religion taking back, quote unquote, your holy land. I say quotes because, really, if you look at those three major religions, they're all the Holy Land. So it's hard to say this is my holy land, but I'm not getting into that. I'm really not. But it's A, it's that, and it's B, it's also the guy he's the head of this, this body, if you will, that's coming to take back this place, is the Pope. And so he really is. It's one of the times in history where the Pope kind of solidified himself as the head of the Catholic Church. And that is how popes happened. Since we're talking about the Pope and Rome, I thought it'd be interesting to just quickly kind of delve into the history of the Vatican, because it is an interesting kind of entity in itself. The Vatican is located in the heart of Rome, and as I said earlier, it was placed right over the tomb of St. Peter, and he dies, around 65 AD. And within 100 years of that death, they've already built a church over it, right? And so Pope Sylvester I, he builds a new church over the tomb in 324 AD, and this was the original St. Peter's Basilica. And so this lasted until the 1400s, when Pope Julius II commissioned Donato Gromarti to tear down the old one and build a new, more grand St. Peter's Basilica, which is the one we know of today. And it was Pope Paul III who is the one who actually got Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel. So it all kind of comes together, as you see it.
And now it's time for the roundup. The roundup. The roundup.